Arthropods are the most successful in as far as diversity. There have been described more than 1 million different species of arthropods, but estimates think that there could be 1 billion, so like 10 to the 18th number of arthropods that exist that have not been described, and not just like individual organisms, but different species. And part of where they get this success in diversity comes from their body plan. So they have this segmented body plan where they have lots of these repetitive segments. And by modifying these segments into different structures for different functions, they can come up with really unique, really exciting, and different body structures. So this started to happen around the Cambrian explosion, and so you can see some of these early fossils, the segments mostly look the same. So through this thorax all the way to the tail, these segments aren't very different. It's got a bit of a modified segment up here for a head region. But when you look at more novel arthropods, like this butterfly, there are specialized antennae. Those are segments. There's segments on the head for feeding. There's segments over here for walking. There's segments over here for reproducing. There's segments up here that get specialized for wings. So every segment has a different function. And those different functions come from these Hox genes. So with diversity in regulation or sequencing of or mutations through these body plan genes, we start to see really, really cool body plans coming about. One of the other characteristics of arthropods is that they have an exoskeleton. So exo meaning outside. And this is made out of chitin. It's secreted from the body in a cuticle. It's light and flexible where the joints are bent, but it's also very sturdy and strong to help protect the outside of the animal. And this is one of the things that made them able to colonize land. And because the exoskeleton is going to mean that they don't need to be near the water, it's going to help them hold water in, and it's also going to provide structural support, so they no longer have to deal with gravity. And by being able to come on land, that gives a huge area of terrestrial and air as niches that had not been fulfilled by animals yet. So here are some characteristics. So arthro means joint, and poda means foot. So these are jointed feet, and you can see that these have joints along these appendages, and they're covered in exoskeleton. Again, the exoskeleton is light and flexible at the joints, and it's more sturdy over the flat surfaces, but it does cover the entire outside. There's huge advantages to having the exoskeleton, being able to come on land, having structural support, protection against predators, but there's also some drawbacks. The exoskeleton does not grow. So in order to grow, they have to molt. This is a process called ecdysis, right? For Ecdysozoa. That's why they're in this clade. And this is an energetic process, and it also leaves them open to predation. So they have to secrete a new, larger exoskeleton all at once. And that's a really energetically costly process. And the process of doing that, they are also very vulnerable. Most arthropods need to find some kind of safe space to be while they're molting. They have what's called an open circulatory system. So this is the heart, and it pumps hemolymph out into the body. And so you can see that the circulatory system does not come all the way back to the heart. It pumps it out into the body, hemolymph, and then that gets taken back up by the arteries around the gills and then brought back to the heart. So basically what just means that the circulatory system is not completely connected. There's a huge diversity of gas exchange. Some of the terrestrial organisms have actual lungs. Some of the aquatic ones use gills. Some of them are small enough that they don't need either of those structures and they can just absorb oxygen through their skin. There's 3 major groups. So we have the Chelicerates, which are going to be characterized by their chelicera appendages. We have the Myriapods, myria meaning many, which are characterized by having many, many feet. And then the pancrustaceans. And so these are going to be the crustaceans as well as insects. grouped together, and those are based mostly on genetic sequencing to put the lobsters and other crustaceans as the most close related ancestors to insects. So here are the chelicerates. So we've got some examples. Our spiders. Here we've got scorpions. Here's our horseshoe crab up here. So the early chelicerates, so these would have been the first to branch off, would have been the water spider as well as the horseshoe crab, which is up here. And then more modern chelicerates are things like the scorpion, the arachnids, and the mites. Scorpions, spiders, have a specific structure for gas exchange called book lungs. And what these do, these are folded over and over and over to create a large area for surface area for the hemolymph to flood over them. And it looks kind of like a book with pages that are stacked on top of it. That's where it gets its name. So chelicerates are named for their chelicera. So that is the second feeding appendage here. So here's the first one, which is the pedipalp. And then this one right here would be the chelicera. And these often have a gland that can secrete enzymes. So a spider can stab its prey with the chelicera, pierce it, and secrete digestive enzymes or toxins to kill its prey and then make it easy to subdue. Spiders also make characteristic webs. So each species of spider makes a distinct, meaning different web. And it's been shown that the behavior and structure of spider webs is actually inherent. So there is a genetic code for what the spider's web will look like that is not a learned trait. Myriapods are all terrestrial, and these are going to be our millipedes and centipedes. And these are myriapod because they have a myriad, which means many, legs, poda. And there's two main groups of these. We've got the millipedes. The millipedes typically have 2 legs per segment. So here's one segment, and then at the bottom they have 2 little legs. And these are going to be mostly harmless. They eat decomposing leaves and plant matter, so these are herbivores. And they don't actually have 1,000 legs, so milli means 1,000, but they have something like probably 100 legs or so. And then centipedes down here, you can see that their segments are a little bit larger and they're only going to have 1 leg per segment. And so these are carnivores. They often have poison claws on these first segments here and can paralyze their prey or help defend themselves against a predator. Pancrustacean is an interesting group because this is a clade by genetics. So what we can see here is the chelicerates are the most different. Then we have the myriapods coming out here. And then we have the crustaceans, as well as the insects being sister to each other. So that actually means that lobsters are most closely related to insects than to any other terrestrial species. So you would think that insects that live on land would be more closely related to other land-dwelling arthropods. However, that's not true. They are actually more closely related to the marine crustaceans, which are more like lobsters and crabs. So in Pancrustacea, we have 2 groups, the crustaceans, and these are mostly aquatic, so we're going to see these in marine and freshwater environments. Many of them can be terrestrial, so like crabs can come up on land. And they typically exchange gas through their cuticle, so through their outer exoskeleton. Some of the larger ones have gills, but typically a lot of the smaller ones don't need them. An isopod is one of the largest groups, so this right here is an isopod. And then we also have groups that are called decapods. So those are going to be like the crabs, shrimps. I don't think I have lobsters on here. There's another shrimp. There are many planktonic species, and these are going to be down here. Some of them are copepods, and some of them are krill, so like this guy. And these are teeny tiny microscopic animals, and plankton typically means that they are not able to propel themselves through the water and overcome the force of the water. So a planktonic species like this is typically just going to follow the current of the water and float where it goes. It's not going to be able to walk or swim against some kind of water current. So these are really big food sources for things like baleen whales, whale sharks that eat really low on the food web. Barnacles are an interesting crustacean. So this is a barnacle. So this actually has an outer shell that looks a lot like a bivalve. So this looks like a mollusk, but it is not a true mollusk. It is actually a crustacean that has been modified to be sessile and attached to a surface and then filter feed there with gills. And then our biggest, most diverse group here are the insects. So these are a group called hexapods, which means that they have 6 legs. So if you look at any one of these insects, you can count that they have 6 walking appendages. They have many other appendages on here for feeding, for capturing prey, for flight, for reproducing. But insects are ubiquitous, which means that they are found literally everywhere. They can be found in aquatic environments, they can be found in terrestrial environments, they can be found in the air, right? So many of these can fly, so they can walk, they can swim. Marine environments are the rarest place to find them, but you can find insects literally everywhere you go. And so these have more species than all of the other groups of animals combined. The oldest fossil evidence is about 415 million years, so this would have followed that explosion of Cambrian diversity. And flight has provided this group with a huge advantage. So when this became terrestrial, not only were they able to walk around on the ground, but they were able to fly. So flying means that I can disperse, I can easily find mates, I can find new habitats, I can escape from predators, and unlike flying mammals, so like birds or bats, who had to give up their forelimbs in order to attain flight, so like birds don't have arms and wings, that's a dragon, that's not real, dragons aren't real, but insects actually have 2 sets of wings plus 6 sets of walking feet. So they are just as effective at walking as they are at flying. They didn't have to compromise. We believe that insects radiated as around the same time as the expansion of flowering plants, which would make sense because there are a huge amount of insects that are pollinators for flowering plants. Insects typically go through a body change structure called metamorphosis. So metamorphosis just means that their body is going to change over time. And there's 2 different types of metamorphosis. The one that you learned in elementary school is complete metamorphosis. So this is where we start with a caterpillar who looks nothing like a butterfly. It goes into some kind of intermediate stage like a pupa, which in this case is a chrysalis. And then it emerges as an adult. So the adult is the butterfly and the caterpillar look extremely different. Incomplete metamorphosis would be something more like you would see in a beetle. So a young beetle and an adult beetle look very similar. They might have some different structures as far as like what their head shape is like and how big they are. But over its life, a beetle starts beetle looking and then molts, and every molt it changes a little bit until it becomes its full adult sexual stage where it will get its wings, and then finally its reproductive structures will be mature. And it's not super different from what it looked like as after it hatched out of its egg. So these do lay eggs, and typically an adult insect will find a food source like a plant and lay eggs on top of it. And that way, when the eggs hatch, those caterpillars or the nymphs have a huge amount of food immediately so that they can start growing and then finding food sources of their own and then finding mates. So these are often going to cause damage to crops. So when plants have evolved a lot of mechanisms to prevent insects from laying eggs on them, things like being able to just drop a leaf that's too heavy with eggs, or false eggs that prevent butterflies from laying eggs on them. But we use pesticides to spray crops with to try to get rid of insects that are laying its larvae on our plants.